All right, let's just jump right in. This is probably one of the biggest questions we humans ever ask ourselves, right? What happens after we die? Well, forever, really, we've had to rely on faith, on philosophy. But what if some people went right to the edge and actually came back to tell us about it? And that's really what this all boils down to. Is there something else waiting for us? Or is this it? It's a massive question. So today, we're going to zero in on one really fascinating and, yeah, pretty controversial piece of the puzzle, the near-death experience. So here's the game plan. First, we'll get clear on what this phenomenon actually is. Then we'll look at the two big arguments. Is it a real peek into another world, or is it just a powerful trick of a dying brain? We'll dig into one absolutely baffling case that science still struggles with, and then we'll end on the final question, and I'll let you be the judge.
Okay, so first things first, let's make sure we're all on the same page. What are we really talking about when we say near-death experience?
You know, the term NDE got really popular thanks to researchers like Tachibana Takashi. Basically, it's this incredibly intense personal experience that someone reports after being right on the brink of death. We're talking cardiac arrest, major accidents, and then somehow they're brought back. And let me be clear, these aren't just some fuzzy dreams. To the people who have them, they feel more real than real life.
Now, here's the part that gets really wild. The stories are shockingly similar. It doesn't matter what your culture is, what your religion is, or where you're from. You hear these same things over and over again. This amazing, warm, loving light. A tunnel, the sensation of floating outside your own body. And so often, people talk about meeting relatives who've already passed away. That consistency? Well, that's a huge piece of the puzzle for people who believe these experiences are genuine. So let's explore that first big idea. This is the argument that NDEs are exactly what they feel like. A true peek behind the curtain that separates life from whatever comes next.
And you can't get much more compelling than this. This quote is from a neurosurgeon, a guy who taught at Harvard, no less. He got a super rare brain infection that put him in a deep coma. His neocortex, that's the part of our brain that handles all conscious thought, sight, sound, everything, it was completely shut down. Medically speaking, he shouldn't have been able to experience anything. And yet, he came back with this vivid, incredibly detailed story of the afterlife. For him, there's just no other way to explain it. But of course, there's always another side to the coin. So let's flip it over and look at this from a purely scientific view, which says this isn't a spiritual journey at all, but a biological one. From this perspective, as the brain is put under the ultimate stress, as it's being starved of oxygen, it doesn't just shut down, it creates one last epic story. It's not a window into another dimension, it's a powerful hallucination, a movie produced by our own mind. So you see how this works, right? You take the exact same phenomenon and you get two totally different explanations. That feeling of incredible peace and love, believers say that's the feeling of the beyond. Scientists say, well, that's a massive dump of endorphins, the body's natural painkillers. The tunnel and the light could just be the visual cortex shutting down bit by bit. But what about those out-of-body observations where people see things they couldn't possibly have seen? Now that's where it gets really tricky. And check this out, because this really backs up the whole "it's all in the brain" idea. Scientists have found they can trigger experiences that feel a lot like an NDE without anyone coming close to death. Fighter pilots pulling high Gs in a centrifuge, they get tunnel vision and see bright lights as the blood leaves their brain. People practicing judo who get choked out have even reported feeling blissed out and like they're floating. Okay, so just when you think the scientific explanation has it all figured out, you stumble on a case that just doesn't fit. A story from one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century that is still a huge mystery. Back in 1944, the legendary psychoanalyst Carl Jung had a heart attack, and he had an incredibly powerful NDE. He described floating up high above the planet and seeing the Earth as a sphere with its bluish glow, seeing the continents and the oceans laid out before him. But here's the kicker. This was in 1944. The first human being to actually see that view with his own eyes, Yuri Gagarin, didn't go to space until 1961, 17 years later. So you just have to ask, right? If this was all just a hallucination cooked up inside his oxygen-starved brain, how in the world did he dream up a perspective that no human had ever actually seen before? It's a massive point for the people who believe there's something more going on here. So how does science even begin to tackle something like Jung's out-of-body experience? Well, researchers decided to focus on that specific sensation. Can you actually trick the brain into feeling like it has left the body?
And they came up with this brilliant experiment. So imagine this. You put on a VR headset, and what you see is a live video of your own back, like you're standing right behind yourself. Then a researcher starts to stroke your actual back with a rod, and at the exact same time, you see a rod stroking the image of your back in the headset. And what happens is your brain gets confused. Your sense of sight and your sense of touch don't line up, and it solves the problem by creating this powerful illusion that your consciousness, yourself, has literally floated out of your body. It's proof that this profound sensation can be manufactured.
So after all that, where are we? We're kind of left staring at two pieces of evidence that are both incredibly powerful and completely contradict each other. On one side, you've got Carl Jung's vision, a piece of knowledge that just seems impossible for his brain to have created on its own. And on the other side, you have the VR experiment, clear, scientific proof that the brain's sense of self can be tricked into feeling like it's left the body. Which leads us right back to the ultimate question. What is a near-death experience? Is it a genuine window, a quick look at what's on the other side? Or is it the brain's final, beautiful, and maybe deceptive farewell performance? The last story it tells itself as the curtain falls. There's evidence for both. And the final answer? Well, that's up to you to decide. What happens when we die? I mean, it's got to be the single greatest mystery of our existence, right? For centuries, all we really had were faith and philosophy to guide us. But what if some people have actually stood on the very edge of that final frontier and then came back to tell us about it? That's what we're digging into today, the absolutely fascinating world of near-death experiences. So this is the core question, isn't it? When people who were clinically dead are brought back, they tell these incredible, vivid stories. Are they getting a real glimpse of an afterlife? Or is something else going on? We're going to look at the stories, we're going to look at the science, and the huge questions that they raise. You know, the whole conversation we have now about NDEs, it really kicked off back in the 1970s. And that's thanks to a researcher named Raymond Moody. He was really the first person to systematically gather all these stories from people who'd been revived, and when he compared them, he found these astonishingly consistent patterns. And what he and other researchers found is that this journey, it's surprisingly universal. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, people report a really similar sequence of events. It usually starts with this feeling of moving super fast through a long, dark tunnel. Then boom, you're suddenly outside of your physical body, kind of floating, watching the whole scene from above. So many people then say they encounter this warm, brilliant being of light and experience this incredibly rapid, panoramic review of their entire life, right before they're told it's not their time and they have to return. So this all boils down to one central debate. Are these experiences actual proof that our consciousness can exist outside the body, a true peek into a world beyond ours? Or are they the final, really elaborate show put on by a brain that's under an immense amount of stress? Let's start by looking at what science has to say. So how in the world does science even begin to explain something that feels so profound? Well, neurologists have a pretty compelling argument. They say the dying brain isn't just shutting off. It's actually running a series of complex emergency protocols that could create these very experiences. For scientists, the explanation pretty much starts with this condition called cerebral anoxia. It's a technical term, but all it really means is that when your heart stops, blood stops flowing to your brain. And when the brain is deprived of oxygen, it kicks off this whole cascade of effects as different parts of it start to fail. Okay, so that famous tunnel that everyone talks about, according to this theory, it might not be a tunnel at all. It's probably just the brain's vision center, the occipital lobe, shutting down from the outside in. So as your peripheral vision collapses, the only thing left is that one central point of light. And that creates this powerful illusion that you're traveling down a tunnel towards it. All right, next up we have the temporal lobe. You can think of this part of the brain as a major hub. It's where memories, sounds, and our deepest emotions all get mixed together. And scientists, they believe this little region plays a starring role in the whole NDE. And get this, There was a famous experiment that seems to back this up perfectly. A neurosurgeon named Wilder Penfield was doing brain surgery on conscious patients, and he would electrically stimulate their temporal lobes. And what happened? They reported sensations that were identical to NDEs, hearing music, reliving old memories, and even feeling that classic out-of-body sensation. It really suggests that just unusual activity in this one region could be creating the core of the experience.
Okay, but what about that feeling? That overwhelming sense of peace and love that so many people report? Well, the brain has an answer for that too. In moments of extreme trauma, the body floods itself with endorphins. They're basically our own natural morphine. This powerful chemical wave could easily explain that intense euphoria and the complete absence of pain. So if you put it all together, the scientific perspective is that the NDE is the brain's last-ditch effort to make sense of its own shutdown. When all the information from the outside world gets cut off, the brain turns inward. It becomes a storyteller, grabbing a lifetime of memories, beliefs, and emotions, and weaving them all together into one final, meaningful story.
You know, that neurological explanation, it's tidy. It really makes a lot of sense. But, and this is a big but, there are some cases, some stories that are so detailed, so specific, that they seem to completely defy that neat little model. This right here is the million-dollar question for anyone studying NDEs. I mean, it's one thing to have a private internal experience. It's something else entirely when a patient who is clinically dead reports seeing real, verifiable things happening around their unconscious body. Researchers have a name for it: vertical perception. And there is one case that always stands out as maybe the most compelling piece of evidence against a purely scientific explanation. It involves a man undergoing major heart surgery. He was completely totally unconscious, even had his eyes taped shut. And later, he claimed he watched his own operation from a spot up near the ceiling. And the things he claimed he saw were just shockingly specific. He described the lead surgeon's weird habit of flapping his arms like a chicken to direct his assistants without breaking sterile procedure. He knew, somehow, that a vein was being taken from his leg to be used in the bypass. He correctly saw that his heart, which had been drained of blood, was actually a pale whitish color, not red. He even said his heart looked like it was sitting on a glass table, which, surgeons later explained, was the bed of ice they used to chill the organ. There was just no way he could have known any of this. So where does all of this leave us? On one side, we have this powerful scientific model that explains many, maybe even most, of the elements of an NDE. But on the other side, we have these meticulously documented cases that seem absolutely impossible to explain within that scientific box.
The author Tachibana, whose amazing work inspired this explainer, he landed on this really beautiful, kind of poignant idea that maybe the NDE is a final act of our own biology, a compassionate mechanism that evolved to give us a peaceful, profound, and beautiful dream as we face the very end.
And that's the question we're left with. Is this incredible experience a keyhole into another reality, a confirmation that life goes on after death? Or is it the most beautiful story our own brain will ever tell us, a final comforting gift to ourselves as the lights go out? Maybe, just maybe, the answer isn't as important as the profound sense of wonder that the question itself inspires.